Hello all. Thank you for listening in today on this conversation with myself and previous ADRP President Nancy McKinney. Why don't we start with some introductions, then we can talk about what we hope to cover today. So Nancy, let's start with you. Can you share just a little bit about yourself, including your current role and your history with ADRP?
Thanks, Brie. It's great to be with you here today. I'm Nancy McKinney, and I served as ADRP's president from 2009 through 2014. I first joined the ADRP board in 2006 and ADRP as a member in 2004. When I was an ADRP volunteer, I was the Director of Donor Stewardship at the University of California, Berkeley. Today, I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Advancement Operations, what some would call Advancement Services, a role that I've held since 2020. I have to note that it was one of our inaugural directors, Kathy Ruvalo, who was at the University of California, Irvine at the time, who introduced me to ADRP. And it was another of our inaugural directors, Paige Eubanks-Barrow, who nominated me to serve on the board. I'd also like to acknowledge Rose Dalba, our second president and my predecessor, who spent weekend time with me in April of 2004 when I was visiting Chicago, and Lisa Honan, co-chair of our 2004 conference, who I met at the Case Donor Relations Conference in June 2004. Rose and Lisa were among my earliest professional contacts as newcomers in the field, and I think they were part of my success in our work.
Thank you, Nancy. So my name is Brie Aguila. I am the current president of ADRP. In my day job, I am the Assistant Vice Chancellor for External Relations and Operations for the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. I've been with CU for 16 years and started as a development assistant before moving into frontline fundraising and then to my true love of donor relations and stewardship. I've been lucky to build a team at CU Anschutz and love that I work for an institution that truly has that stewardship first mentality. I became an ADRP member 13 years ago and joined the board almost 5 years ago. I will finish my year as president in September. And of course, when I'm not at work or focused on anything ADRP, you'll find me with my husband and our 3 children. So enough about me. For the rest of our time together, I thought it would be fun to take a little bit of a then and now approach. We have spent a lot of time reflecting over these past few months as we celebrate 20 years of ADRP. So while you weren't the first president of ADRP, Nancy, you were the longest serving president. So I think your insights will be fascinating. Can you share what the process of the board looked like when you were the president and what were the goals of the board at that time?
I'm pretty sure we've had an annual nominations process since our inception. The earliest records I have in my files are from 2006. Even as a fledgling organization, we had robust volunteer interest. That year, there were 11 nominees for 4 director positions. What was different from today was that we had 4 officers, president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, and officers were elected by the directors rather than by the membership. The 2006 call for nominations indicated 2-year terms. Revisions to the bylaws, which were enacted in 2007, extended them to 3-year terms and introduced term limits. Quite different from today, board terms aligned with the calendar year, January through December. This changed after we engaged professional staff who helped us see that aligning terms with the annual conference was really useful. We stood up our first strategic planning process in 2006 with a charge from Rose to develop a 3-year strategic plan that reflects broad input from the membership and that includes annual milestones for the organization. Joe Donnelly, our founding president, served on that committee, as did then Vice President Pam Havens, among others. Through that process, we developed the following vision and mission statements. Vision: ADRP is the authoritative organization and advocate for the donor relations and stewardship profession. Mission: ADRP supports the development community by promoting the professional status of donor relations and stewardship offices through educational, professional development, and networking opportunities. These vision and mission statements were codified in the bylaws in 2007, and while these have been updated over time, I think that their essence continues to resonate today. The plan also set goals and objectives that were the foundation, I think, of the work ADRP has been doing ever since. Enhance the value of membership by expanding programming, leveraging technology, and building the network, and be the leader in the profession by defining the role, marketing the brand, and fostering partnerships. So the board had some very ambitious goals for ADRP quite early on in its existence. Practically speaking, though, the board had its hands full with the conference. While there have always been conference chairs and conference committees, before we engaged professional staff, the board was by necessity more hands-on with the conference, meaning that we didn't always have as much bandwidth to work on other aspects of the strategic plan as we would have liked.
Well, yes, of course, absolutely. I mean, I love hearing all of this from you. And I just have to say before we go on that I love that you can still reference files from 2006. That just speaks to my organizational heart. I love that you can still access those. That's amazing. So it's clear more and more that it was all of the work that was done by you and the many others that we've discussed and you've mentioned that we were able to keep things moving forward. And really it was because of your thoughtful approach when everything was created. We reference the bylaws in almost every meeting, and not because we're changing them, although to your point, they have changed slightly over time, but because of good intention. But honestly, it's more because they continue to guide our work. And as you are reading through the mission and the vision and even the goals and the objectives, they're so consistent from where, with where we are today, which I'll get in here in just a second. So we do have term limits for board members now, and I think that really helps for forecasting and succession planning. And recently we spent some time talking about board composition to make sure that we are set up for success every year. So again, you mentioned mission and vision, as well as the goals and objectives. So it really hasn't changed much. Our mission today is that ADRP is the diverse community of donor relations professionals sharing education, knowledge, and experience, and empowering members to advance their careers and drive excellence in the field. And our vision is that ADRP is universally recognized as the authority on donor engagement for the philanthropy profession. Again, you can hear consistencies through what it was to what it is today. And we created 7 N's to guide our organization and our activities. And I think it was really sort of formalizing what you mentioned as your goals into those 7 N's. So they kind of fall under 4 subcategories: member maturity and advancement, skills and abilities development, member experience, and then value of the profession. But more specifically, the 7 N's are: members advance within the profession, members are leaders in the profession, members have affordable, high volume, high quality content and intelligent educational resources to generate and sustain donor relationship programs, including in-person and online programming. Members have opportunities to partner and network with industry professionals and peer groups. Members learn effective practices for work being done in the field. Members have experiences at ADRP that model how donors should be treated. And last, members are knowledgeable and able to communicate the value of donor relations and stewardship. We also followed up on strategic planning. We went through a new strategic planning process in January of 2020, right before we had to completely pivot our vision for that year and the years to come. It was a 5-year plan, but what I found is it just really helped to focus us. I think as with any passionate volunteer group, sometimes our big ideas outpace our bandwidth. And as you and I have chatted, Nancy, we laughed that was one thing that probably hasn't changed over time. So looking forward, we will be refreshing that strategic plan in January of 2026. And I think we've learned a lot over these last 5 years that will better inform and focus both our goals, but also how we're measuring our successes. So let's move to the actual board meetings. We discussed previously the technical differences. Can you also walk us through what a board meeting would look like when you were president?
I don't know that board meetings are all that different today than they were years ago, except for the difference in enabling technology. I pulled a random monthly meeting agenda from early 2009. It started with a consent agenda that covered minutes, a financial report, and reports from standing committees, followed by sections for action items, discussion items, and other updates. It was much harder, though, to conduct business via conference call. It took time for new people to learn each other's voices, and it was difficult to know when someone wanted to say something. In January of 2011, we held our first board meeting via GoToMeeting, an early entry into the market that's now dominated by Zoom. We used another of their products, GoToWebinar, to support the webinar series launched in March of 2010. Like all new technology, there were some bumps on the road to implementation, but it improved things dramatically. Of course, there's no substitute for in-person engagement, which we had twice a year, once at conference, and an annual planning meeting hosted by a board member at their institution. This is where deep thinking happened and where we had time to have fun in each other's company.
Absolutely. I can imagine all of this just as you described. In fact, when we were talking previously, I just kept thinking about voice recognition. You really would have to recognize people's voices and know who was talking and how to engage accordingly. And I still laugh that prior to 2020, the idea of a complete virtual conference was crazy. And we actually pulled 2 of them off, which of course is a huge nod to both our offices, our partners in the office, and all the volunteers that made that happen. So you're right. Our current agendas follow a very similar cadence. I will, again, give a nod to the office staff for keeping us organized and on track. I think that cadence has worked well. I think the consistency has helped. So we have a board meeting every month currently. We actually have 3 of those in person now. So 1 is at conference and then 2 other in-person engagements. The rest are via Zoom. We missed those in-person ones in 2020 and 2021. And you're right, there's just nothing that can replicate that. I think the other person that we've tried to emphasize is not only the in-person connection within our board, but the opportunity to connect with our members and even potential members wherever it is that we are in person for those board meetings. So we were doing some of that, pre-2020. And once we started to return back to in person again, we decided to make those engagements an extension of my ADRP. So there's amazing conversation that happens on virtually on my ADRP. Lots of engagement, really good conversations, lots of expertise shared. And so we wanted to bring that to life. So we're now calling it My ADRP Live. We started in Toronto last year, and we did it just this last June in Boston. And I think we're hoping to look forward to doing another one in January or February as well. So let's talk about new volunteers. How did you find new volunteers, and do you know how many volunteers you had at that time?
Before I respond to that, I really just want to applaud all of you for the My ADRP Live concept. Connecting with members where they are is something I think we would have liked to have done, and it was just too early to think about how we would go about putting that together when we got together. So I sure hope that sometime in the not too distant future, we'll see you out here in California, and I would look forward to getting together with you if you come out this way. So getting back to volunteers, we've always been fueled by volunteers, haven't we, Brie? In 2009, we had 8 standing committees: executive, governance, finance, marketing and public relations, recruitment and membership, technology, professional development, and operating, and 4 ad hoc committees: the International Conference, nominations, scholarships, and awards, and 20 key volunteer roles that were not part of a committee per se. Examples of this were the job board editor and the hub editor. In the days before we had professional staff, we had volunteers that managed the website, and eventually the MemberClicks technology platform that our online presence still runs on today, volunteers that handle the technical aspects of webinars, and volunteers that monitor the listserv, the precursor to today's online community. So really, the volunteers in that time frame, including members of the board, not only governed ADRP, we also operated ADRP. And, you know, it was truly, I think, for a lot of people, kind of a 24/7 responsibility, unlike, I hope, the kind of experience those of you who volunteer for ADRP have today.
Well, you know, I'm going to take a pause because you're right. So we've touched on the office staff or professional staff a few times. So for those of you listening that may not know, ADRP made the decision to hire an association management company in 2011. SBI is that company, and we still work with them today. So I know, to Nancy, to your point, I know everything that SBI does for us today. And wow, that was a huge lift for you and your colleagues at that time, doing everything that SBI now does, plus that, you know, since SBI was brought on board. I mean, it's truly amazing. And of course it would be a 24/7 job because there's so much to do. And SBI has helped tremendously with that lift, which I think has helped us grow. But I cannot even imagine all the stuff that they help us with that you all were just shouldering. It is just amazing. And what a monumental decision to move towards that association management company. So I I thank you more than anything, because I can only imagine what my day-to-day would look like if they weren't here. So thank you to all you and everyone else who brought SBI on in 2011. That's amazing. So I think one of the other things that is consistent with sort of the then and now approach is the growth of ADRP, not only in the number of members, but really the number of volunteers. There's no doubt that the founders, the previous boards, the volunteers, they all set the foundation for where we are today. So we currently have 11 committees, as well as 3 to 5 regional planning committees with over 150 volunteers. As we prepared for today's chat, I just continue to find, you know, the importance of volunteers across the board and across the life of ADRP. And to your point, that has never changed, but yet it is so vitally important. What I really am proud of is I have seen such a focus and importance placed on the volunteer experience. You know, to your point, you all were just all hands on deck trying to get it done somehow, some way. And we are doing that today still, but also I think we're really trying to take the opportunity to just really make it a meaningful experience to volunteer for ADRP, and you know, find ways that we can get anyone connected that will make the biggest impact for themselves, but also feel appreciated. So we've instituted a volunteer orientation and onboarding, which I think has helped sort of level set with everyone. We've updated toolkits to set our volunteers up for success. Typically, those are used with regionals, but we've used them in other ways as well. So we're not continuing to reinvent the wheel all the time. And we're continuing to clarify the role of the office staff. And I think all of that together has really helped, I hope, to kind of drive the importance and the enjoyment of being a volunteer for ADRP. So before we talk about the vision of ADRP looking forward, what do you think the biggest change was during your tenure, Nancy?
So there are 3 things that really come to mind, and they all relate to my focus during my first term as president on ensuring the long-term sustainability of ADRP. You know, it wasn't clear to me at the time that you know, we all were working very hard towards the long-term future, but there were some things about the organization that were a little fragile, that, you know, depended so much on a particular volunteer, that if that person needed to step aside for whatever reason, that area that they were focused on for the organization, we didn't know if we could find someone else who could come in and do that same task on an ongoing, continuous basis. So, you know, the first thing, which we've now talked about, is engaging the professional staff. We had some discussion around employing an individual or person, a person, perhaps a retired practitioner, to be our executive director, but ultimately decided on the association management company route, as you mentioned, having a company with staff, with resources, with infrastructure seemed like a better choice than setting somebody up in a home office, let's say, to play the role of executive director for the organization. So hiring SBI in 2011 and completing that transition to a staff managed organization at the end of 2012 got the board and other volunteers out of the business of operating ADRP on a day-to-day basis. Second, which was sort of a logical follow-on to that, was policy governance, which we transitioned to in 2014. The idea of policy governance is to create role clarity and set expectations among an organization's owners, in our case, the members, the board, and the executive, which in our case is our executive director, Louise Miller. It lifts the board out of the day-to-day so that the board can focus on vision and strategy. And as you talked about, establishing the ends that then everyone in the organization, whether staff or volunteer, is working towards. And last, we changed the officer structure, moving to a president-elect, president, immediate past president model, rather than having a president and vice president. I knew that this was really important for succession planning for my role. It was clear that it was going to be difficult to find someone who was interested and willing to take on a 3-year commitment as president. So we made this transition and implemented it as I stepped down. And it's enabled an amazing group of colleagues to succeed me in leading ADRP. Erin, Julie, Kathleen, Eliza, Jen, Michael, Carrie, Angela, Cheryl, and now you, Brie.
You are right when you say amazing group of colleagues that followed you and preceded me. As you read their names, I was getting butterflies, and if anybody could see me, I was smiling very big. Definitely some big shoes to fill for sure, and honestly, I still can't believe that my name's up there with them. But I can tell you that all of those shifts that you mentioned were monumental to ADRP's success today. My tenure as president is only 1 year, but I would say from my time on the board, not necessarily the biggest change, but the most exciting movement forward has been our work on our curriculum offering. This has been talked about since before I had joined the board, and it has been such an amazing experience to see it come together. And since you mentioned Louise Miller specifically, we are in the process of transitioning to Adam Carranza as our executive director. Louise has been the glue that has really held the historical knowledge and provided the insight into past discussions or decisions. But Adam has really jumped in and already added so much value. So while we will miss Louise, I know we are in great hands with Adam. All right, so let's look forward a little bit. Let's talk about, what is your vision now, Nancy? I mean, I know you've always been involved. You're obviously not on the board today, but you're still, connected to the industry, and you had so much to do with where ADRP is today. What is your vision looking forward for ADRP now?
As I mentioned earlier, we set the vision of being the authoritative organization in donor relations and stewardship in 2007. I think that's endured and will continue to do so. What's exciting is that today's ADRP is implementing ideas that we bounced around years ago in fulfillment of that vision. The curriculum offering is a great example. I remember a discussion about that eventuality at a planning meeting at Vanderbilt in 2008. So, my vision in many ways for ADRP hasn't changed, but it's coming to fruition, which is just so exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, we've touched on this before. I think with volunteer-run organization, it's common to have a lot of big ideas and sometimes can be a little slow moving them forward. I think also because it's not our full-time job all day, every day. Sometimes we can lack momentum sometimes, but this has been really, really fun. I share your excitement for seeing something that had been in discussions, to your point, back to 2008, come to fruition today. In addition, I would say I have seen donor relations really become a career with movement and leadership positions. When I started in donor relations over 10 years ago, that really wasn't the case, or I wasn't seeing it anyway. My vision for ADRP is that we continue to bring credibility to such a crucial industry and really lead the way in best practice, collaborations, and a community of support. Well, I cannot believe that our time together is already coming to an end. It feels like we just started chatting. I could listen to you talk about your experience and your time with ADRP all day. So before we close, is there anything else that you would like to add?
I guess I'd just like to say that I think it's well known that many membership organizations, including professional organizations like ADRP, struggle to keep their numbers up. When we first met Louise and her colleagues at SBI, they were struck by our growing membership roster, our expanding programming, and our financial strength, all of which have continued in the years since then. It's really gratifying to see ADRP not only sustaining, but thriving, and it's all due to the dedication and resiliency of our leaders, our volunteers, and our staff. So I'd just like to say thank you to all of you for your continued service to ADRP.
Well said. I think Nancy and I both wondered if anyone would care what we had to say today, but I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm leaving today seeing that some things have changed, but there is a lot that has stayed true, which I think is exactly why ADRP has remained strong and growing. So with that, we hope to see many of you in Indianapolis in September as we come together for our annual conference. It is so perfectly themed as we celebrate 20 years of ADRP, titled To Be a Kid Again, 20 Years of Looking Up. Thank you to you, Nancy, not only for your time today, but for everything that you have done for ADRP and everything you continue to do for our industry.
Thanks so much, Brie. This has really been fun.
Thank you.